Okay, welcome. I'm Christian Lutzernitz, David L. Snellgrove Senior Lecturer in Tibetan and Buddhist Arts. And I welcome you all here for this second talk of the Buddhist Forum sponsored by the Khyentse Foundation. It's the second of 4 events that we'll have, and I hope you can also join the later ones, but they are quite diverse in the ways they look at Buddhism. And today we look from an art historical perspective. Today's lecture is joined by a seminar. If you haven't registered yet, you still can do so. And it will take place tomorrow at 3 p.m., exceptionally late, because there's some overlap with the Portraiture Conference that also has 3 lectures on Qing period just before the seminar. Yeah. And today's talk will also be followed by a reception in room 113, so that's just this corridor down, and then straight ahead to the end of the corridor, room 113. Yeah. Good. With this, I think with this kind of general comments, I can turn to our talk and our speaker today, Wenjing Chou, who is Associate Professor of Art History at Hunter College in the Graduate Center, and who got her PhD in the history of art from the University of California in Berkeley. And that's where we actually met when I was teaching there. And she was one of the students at that time. And we also traveled to Tibet together once, and once to Ladakh when a group of students joined at that time. But of course, since her student days, she has done an enormous amount of work in terms of the book publication, her 2018 book publication on Mount Wudai, Visions of a Sacred Buddhist Mountain, and also has gotten quite prestigious fellowships for her research at different institutions, such as the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, the Center for Advanced Study in Visual Arts at the National Gallery, and the Metropolitan Center for Far Eastern Art Studies at Kyoto. And so it's a great pleasure to welcome her here today to talk about Beneficial to Behold, Buddhist Visions and Efficacy in the Qing Empire. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? This microphone. Thank you so much to Christian for the kind introduction. I consider it one of the greatest fortunes of my life to have studied with you and then followed you to Ladakh and then to Tibet. And so I'm really glad to, also really thrilled to be here today to share my current work with all of you. And I'm hoping to have a chance to talk with you and also learn from you after I present the materials. Should I sit down or stand? I don't. Okay, I might just sit down so I don't block. Oh, I'm not blocking. I might just sit down so I can see the notes. So the lecture that I'll be giving today is part of materials I've been working on. A much lengthier version of it is forthcoming in an essay in this volume called Ritual and Materiality in Buddhism and Asian religions. And I've written sort of smaller versions of it elsewhere. This will be a kind of condensed version of that, which means I'm going to just have forewarn you that there will be quite a lot of images. We can maybe go back once it's done to kind of go look into details and talk about more in detail. So I'll go ahead and get started. So this thangka in the Freer Gallery of Art of the National Museum of Asian Art portrays the Qianlong Emperor of the Manchu Qing dynasty presiding over a pantheon of 108 deities and spiritual masters in a mountain paradise. So as you can see, while Qianlong's face is rendered in this subdued form of European Baroque realism, the signature style of the emperor's favorite court painter, the Milanese Jesuit Giuseppe Castiglione, the rest of the composition, just go back here, observes the iconography and iconometry, which is the measurement and proportion of figures that are typically reserved in Tibetan religious paintings to depict deities and eminent teachers. And these are painted by Lama painters of the Qing court following a well-established lexicon. So in here, Qianlong appears in the triple guises of a high Lama. He's wearing, kind of enrobed and wearing a folded scholar's hat, a pandita's hat. He's seated on a three-cushion throne with an array of ritual implements in front of him. He's also invoked as an emanation of Manjushri, flanked by attributes of a sword and a book above his shoulder. And also a Cakravartin, the Indic persona of a universal Buddhist king, as indicated by the wheel that he holds in his left hand. So this competition, this kind of combination of competing truth between this momentary quality of the face and the kind of more timeless precision of the rest of the thangka, among other things, brings us to the heart of image-making practices in the Qing Empire. So the question I want to ask through this, observing this competition is, how were vision and efficacy created, and for whom? The Freer thangka is among 7 extant portrait thangkas of Qianlong, and also more than a dozen multimedia shrine panels that feature Qianlong at the center of similar pantheons and paradises created by the imperial workshops in Beijing in the second half of the 18th century. The group of thangkas and shrine panels are considered to be one of the most direct expressions of the emperor's claims of authority within the realm of Tibetan Buddhism. Scholars have accordingly analyzed the thangkas' inclusion of figures and the deities in relation to the emperor's goals and practices, and also by extension, his political and religious ideology. However, essential questions have yet to be asked about the objects themselves, not in the least because few archival records indicate when or how the images were made, what accounts for their compositional variations, and where precisely most of the thangkas were once hung or stored. Further, why were they produced in such abundance? What explains the incorporation of such a multiplicity of mediums as well as visual and material idioms? How did they function as objects and images in the creation of rulership and authority? So in what follows today, I will begin by tracing one case in which we can recover something about the image's reception, which is the delivery of a Qianlong thangka to the Dalai Lama's court in Lhasa as a gift. I will then turn to consider the Qianlong thangkas I will consider their deliberate use of Tibetan Buddhist imageries to reveal an unprecedented and sophisticated play with ritual and liturgical conventions in the service of Qianlong's religious diplomacy and Buddhist kingship. I will argue that the image's success, quote unquote success, rests on their careful reformulation of multiple pictorial genres and traditions, which were not only familiar to their makers and their audience, but also understood to be efficacious. So here, by efficacy, I want to just denote the ways in which images and objects within their religious context are perceived to perform specific functions and to produce specific intended results. The creative nature of Qing court's adaptation of Tibetan Buddhist visual, material, and ritual practices was essential to mediating relations between Qing and Tibet, as evidenced by the thangka's conspicuous presence in places of power, both in the Qing court and in Tibet. So in short, the images played a crucial role in facilitating Qing control of Tibet, and their agency bore out of a close collaborative relationship between the emperor and his Buddhist teacher and advisor, Zhangjia Ropei Dorje. I'll go on to talk more later about this. But overall, by attending to the questions of design and viewership, what I'd like to do, step back to doing is kind of thinking about how to steer the study of iconography, and especially Qing iconography, away from the practice of kind of reading pictorial forms and treating their associated religious practices as fixed. Instead, I proposed a reading of the images as visual, material, and ritual interventions that spoke to a particular audience to produce real historical consequences. So in other words, I think what I'm doing here, what is new is neither the artistic process of appropriation, for which the Qing was famous, nor the art historical practice of source identification, but a consideration of the transformative capacity of objects. And in this case, as I'll show, in creating new subjectivities. The Qing images and a broad array of related objects present a compelling case for the generative quality and processes of image making, and by extension, the openness and fluidity of the iconographical and visual conventions themselves. Textual records indicate that at least 3 portraits, thangkas, of the Qianlong were gifted to Tibetan lamas, indicating their broad circulation outside the Qing court. One of the earliest thangkas referenced is still on display today in the Potala Palace, home of the Dalai Lamas and seat of the Tibetan government outside of Lhasa. And it is the very image that this is the very image that was sent in 1757 with the Qing imperial delegation to Lhasa. This mission was led by Qianlong's teacher and advisor Zhangjia Ropei Dorje, and who was tasked with overseeing the selection of the reincarnation of the recently deceased 7th Dalai Lama Kelsang Gyatso. Thousands of monks and laymen reportedly came to the gathering where the thangka was ritually invited into the Potala Palace as the emperor's surrogate. The spectacular reception reciprocates Qianlong's own instructions that the image serve as his substitute for visiting the most venerated sacred image of Tibet, the Zhou Buddha, and for his receiving veneration from the lay and monastic communities. So this decree from 1757 reads something like, Tibet has been the pure and clear sacred realm of my utmost aspiration. However, the journey is long, preventing me from visiting in person. Today, I send my portrait, which is the same as myself, paying homage to the Zhou Buddha in person. Don't prevent anyone from, who wish to admire the portrait to pay homage to it, so on and so forth. So from 1750 until his death, the 7th Dalai Lama ruled as Tibet's temporal and spiritual sovereign with the backing of the Qing court after periods of unrest and bitter rivalry in Lhasa. In the wake of the 7th Dalai Lama's death, Qianlong's dispatch of his proxies, and here I think there are 2 proxies, both Zhangjia and the thangka portrait, reflects his unease about the certainty of Qing control during the power vacuum in the wake of the Dalai Lama's death. The thangka's unequivocal assertion of Qianlong's supremacy seems especially salient in this context. Delivered at a precarious moment of power transition, the gift came to reside within the ritual universe of Tibet's power center and became an important object of ritual veneration, where it still remains today. And so this is you can see where it still is. Beginning in the late 18th century, the image came to substitute for the Qing emperor's presence during the ritual of the golden urn that was invented by Qianlong's court in an attempt to systemize Qing control over the Tibetan system of selecting reincarnate lamas. In other words, the thangka not only played a crucial role in communicating Qianlong's religio-political identity to his Tibetan constituents at the time of its arrival, but continued to stand in for his presence and the presence of subsequent Qing emperors. In what follows, I will examine the various thangkas' deployment of the religious lexicon of Tibetan Buddhist images. My analysis of this kind of language of the thangkas extend to the variation of the different thangkas, as well as and to all of them with the presumption that they have an audience in the Tibetan Buddhist communities within and beyond the Qing court. So here in this, in looking at the language of these thangkas, one apparent source of inspiration for the Qianlong thangkas that is more well known is a genre of images called refuge field thangkas. Here we have a comparison between a Qianlong thangka, which is held at the Yonghegong Monastery, which is on the left-hand side, and it presumably probably is one of the earlier thangkas, judging from Qianlong's relatively youthful face. And on the right here, a comparison with a refuge field thangka from the Ruben Museum of Art, which features in a central position Tsongkhapa, the 14th century founder of the Gelugpa school of Tibetan Buddhism. And I think this comparison does help us to reveal the affinity of the two images. We have numerous smaller figures arranged around a large central figure, grouped in a loosely circular formation with additional groups above and below. There are numerous figures that are actually the same figures in both compositions as well. They have similar composition, but they also have, I just name a few, there's more, sort of famed Indian Buddhist scholars, Nagarjuna, Atisha, Sangha, and so on, that appears throughout as well. Paintings of refuge field pictorialize what a practitioner is instructed to visualize in a devotional practice known as Guru Puja or Lama Tripa in Tibetan. In this woodblock print, that was the basis of the thangka that's seen in the previous slide. We have a colophon at the end that spells out the aim and function of creating what is called a pictorial body of a painting in order to aid the visualization practice. The colophon also spells out that the composition of this refuge field print is based on a particular text, the 17th century Guru Puja liturgy attributed to the fourth Panchen Lama, Lobsang Chökyi Gyatso, a text that has been widely adopted as the standard prescription for the ritual devotion to one's guru, one's root lama, at the beginning of a tantric meditation practice within Gelugpa Buddhism. As a part, so this is Guru Puja is a much longer liturgy, but as a part of this longer liturgy, one imagines all of one's spiritual teachers, past masters and deities in vivid detail, generates their idealized world, and invite them all to come to this world. One then visualizes the teachers and deities dissolving into the guru, who is eventually to come into one's heart through the crown of one's head. This visualization practice can also be understood then as a gift exchange. By paying devotion to and receiving blessings from one's guru, the practitioner merges with the teacher through this process of ritual veneration. Similar to other types of meditative visualization practice, other types of sadhanas in Tibetan Buddhism, this visualization harnesses the practitioner's psychosomatic power to generate an idealized vision, a version of reality. In this case, the teacher is merging with the practitioner with the aim of deconstructing perceived notions of reality. And by the end of the 17th century, the Gelugpa school, founded by Tsongkhapa, depicted in this refuge field painting as the central guru, has become the largest religio-political entity in Tibet, and also the institution that promised a stricter orthodoxy and more uniform ritual and curriculum than any other religious groups, Chinese, Tibetan, or Tibetan across China, Tibet, and Mongolia. Within the Gelugpa curriculum, Guru Puja had become the most universally practiced liturgy for every practitioner. It was also among the numerous teachings and tantric ritual initiations that Zhang Jia had given, Qianlong's teacher Zhang Jia Ruhui Dorji had given to Qianlong, and that Qianlong had practiced on a regular basis. As a practitioner of Guru Puja, Qianlong would have understood the power and significance of the liturgy that evokes Tsongkhapa as the guru and source of all teachings. So coming back then to this comparison, if you wanted to look at the image on the left in the Qianlong thangka from Yonghegong, the image of Tsongkhapa is replaced with that of an emperor, enhanced with the immediacy of this suppressed chiaroscuro, Baroque's chiaroscuro. If the thangka is assumed to function in the same way as a pictorial reminder of Guru Puja, it would imply that the newly centered Qianlong is now the envisioned guru of this refuge field. After all, it is through the alliance with the Gelugpa school that the Manchu emperors ultimately brought Tibet into its fold. So Qianlong's replacement of, or more precisely conflation with, the patriarch of the Gelug school through his veristic appearance as an ordained monk in the iconography of Tsongkhapa seems purposeful. Yet, to read the Qianlong thangka as evidence that it was the emperor who was visualized as a guru, and that by extension the group of thangkas were in fact used for ritual veneration of him as the guru, would be to oversimplify the Qing pictorial intervention. It would also undermine the liberty with which Qianlong's court co-opted images, objects, identities, and also practices. It's important to note that the earliest extant refuge field thangka, and this is actually the one on the right, is one of the earliest ones we can find. They date to no earlier than the end of the 18th century, the same period, and this one probably even later, than when the Qianlong thangkas began to be produced. So it cannot be assumed that the Qianlong thangka designs were derived from the refuge field thangkas in any straightforward way. Rather, it is most likely that as the envisioned world of refuge field was being expressed and codified into its pictorial form, the Qing seized the opportunity to insert the emperor's image into this cosmological representation, just as it was taking shape. In fact, one cannot preclude the possible role that some of the Qianlong thangkas might have played in the subsequent popularization of refuge field thangkas in Tibet. Indeed, it's difficult to overstate Zhang Jia's importance both at Qianlong's court and as the ultimate religious insider of the Gelugpa institution. Zhang Jia was recognized at a young age to be the reincarnation of the second Zhang Jia, Nawang Lotsin Chiden, who had been an esteemed teacher for both Qianlong's father, the Yongzheng Emperor, and his grandfather, Kangxi. Having been brought to the Qing court at the age of 7 by the Qing army who destroyed his home monastery in Amdo of eastern Tibet during the suppression of the Losang Tenjing rebellion, Zhang Jia was subsequently raised and educated at the court alongside the prince that later became Qianlong, the Qianlong emperor. Among all the Tibetan Buddhist clerics who were active in Beijing, Zhang Jia was the only one who dedicated his entire life in service to the court. Meanwhile, through his two major missions to central Tibet, Zhang Jia became closely tied to the chief figures of the Gelugpa institution in central Tibet. He was a major disciple and confidant of the 7th Dalai Lama, and eventually went on to author the letter's biography. Beside becoming Qianlong's root lama, Zhang Jia served as the chief editor and translator of scriptural canons in Tibetan, Mongolian, Chinese, and Manchu languages, and was also the main designer of Buddhist pantheons and architectures at the Qing court. As Qianlong's chief advisor to Buddhist Asian affairs, Zhang Jia advocated for the alliance and diplomacy between Qing and the Gelugpa. Given his extensive engagement in artistic, religious, and political projects, it's likely that Zhang Jia was also the chief instigator behind these thangkas. So one consistent clue to Zhang Jia's role in the thangka project is none other than his appearance as Qianlong's guru in a prominent position above Qianlong. And this happens across all of the different thangkas and also shrine panels. And another thing interesting to note is here that Zhang Jia is not labeled by name. Everybody else is labeled by their title or name, but he's simply labeled as the root lama, Cewei Lama. This labeling in turn makes the figure of Qianlong below him the implied disciple, presenting a more complex hierarchical order than that of the refuge field thangkas, all while retaining their basic form and structure that centers on the guru. The prominently featured presence of Zhang Jia in an enclosed rondo of his own directly above Qianlong tilts the pictorial perspective of the thangka from that of an envisioned universe to one that combines multiple subjectivities. So there's Qianlong as the guru, who can thus be envisioned as the source of all Gelugpa teachings. We can also read Qianlong himself as the subject who envisions his guru Zhang Jia atop his head. Further, the presumed viewer, practitioner of the visualization, witnesses the interdependent and indivisible teacher discipleship that mediates this spiritual universe. The shifting positions between teacher and disciple is also, in fact, in the heart of the Guru Puja practice itself. The liturgy opens with the practitioner imagining and declaring themselves to be a teacher, deity, or Buddha, or the Buddha. The visualization of refuge comes after one is transformed into Buddhahood. One eventually visualizes the spiritual universe of the refuge field dissolving into oneself by way of one's guru. In a similar way, the Qianlong thangkas compels to toggle among Qianlong, his guru Zhangjia, Tsongkhapa, and also Manjushri. The ability to take the place and perspective of another in the visual and visionary world, which is the premise of ritual transformation in Guru Puja, is underscored by the reconfiguration and reorientation of the refuge field in the Qianlong thangkas. So if the refuge field thangka index the centrality of the guru in one's religious practice, the Qianlong thangkas analogously index Qianlong's extraordinary reliance on his Buddhist teacher, on Zhangjia throughout the latter's life and service at the court. The bond between the emperor and his Buddhist teacher is now at the center of this cosmopolitical order, where both of them are as crucial to the flourishing of the Gelugpa school as the founder, Tsongkhapa. The Qing court's keen awareness of the transformative logic of Guru Puja and its associated visual conventions is nowhere better disclosed than by an eighth thangka at the Palace Museum in Beijing. So at first glance, it really looks very similar to the Qianlong thangka. The one on the right is Qianlong. But if you look closely, and the one on the right is a thangka of Qianlong, the version that was originally in the Chashi Lumpa replica in Chengde, the Shiminfu Shou temple. So, but if you look more closely, you'll see that the central figure is none other than Zhangjia. And you can see that his facial features are really well delineated. On the right is another portrait. He has a lump, a wart or lump on his right. It's always characteristically depicted. So the existence of this thangka portrait of Zhangjia complicates an already fraught image-making practice. On the one hand, since Zhangjia was Qianlong's root lama, the eighth thangka, unlike the 7 other ones portraying Qianlong, is a plausible pictorialization of what Qianlong and other students of Zhangjia would visualize in their daily devotions. That is, it could have conceivably served as a pictorial aid for Guru Puja. On the other hand, the pictorial affinity between Zhangjia and Qianlong in these thangkas was also quite bold and unprecedented. That Zhangjia is represented by Qing court artists in identical attire and throne as those of the emperor, and presiding over a same spiritual universe elevates him to a status that was and has never been otherwise being accorded to any other subject of the emperor. And conversely, there has never been an emperor presented in a similar manner as his teacher. So in either scenario, the Qing Imperial Workshop's production of Zhangjia thangka bridges a kind of ontological gap between the refuge thangkas and the Qianlong thangkas. So in the former, if the Zhangjia thangka could in fact operate as an object of devotion and aid to devotion, like the refuge field thangkas, it brings the Qianlong thangkas, presumably made by the same Imperial Workshop, closer to the devotional framework of Guru Puja. And in the latter scenario, the thangkas with almost interchangeable centers capitalized on the fluid and exchangeable identities of teachers and disciples. After all, Guru Puja isn't exchange between this teacher and disciple. Offerings given, blessings received, that is aimed at dissolving this teacher-student subject-object binary. So the double portrayal of Zhangjia and Qianlong as a focal point of devotional practice repositioned the visionary perspective of refuge field paintings by pictorializing not only the envisioned lineages and pantheons, but also the playful fluidity with which the roles of deities and practitioners, teachers and disciples shift and merge. By pictorially assuming the place of his teacher in a religious lineage, Qianlong is presented not simply as an emanation of a deity by which the Manchu emperors were already routinely referenced, but he becomes the human monastic teacher through whom the vast teachings of Buddhism can be accessed. The radical portrayal of Qianlong as a monastic teacher and disciple, and the affinity of the Qianlong thangkas with refuge field paintings, and the pictorial interventions that puns on the interchangeability of gurus and disciples would all have been visible to anyone familiar with the liturgical and pictorial dimensions of Guru Puja. no longer perceived as only a deity incarnate, benefactor, and protector from afar. The Qing Emperor, the Qianlong Emperor, would have this registered at the center of a Gelugpa institution to its members at this juncture of power transition. So the creative intervention of the Qianlong thangkas went much beyond this image of guru devotion, so if you look at the various different versions, 6 out of 7 of them share a near identical assembly with 108 to 118 figures. However, they contain very different compositions, pictorial elements, and arrangement of figures. And so this diversity of form while employing the same iconographic templates points to a continuous process of visual experimentation. And a closer look reveals their intentional adaptation of numerous other types of ritually powerful images, each of them embedding a new layer of efficacy onto them. So in the interest of time, I want to talk about 2 of these other examples of efficacy. And this first one, actually, Christian, I think we brought this you pointed out this to me a number of years ago. So, and so this is a very interesting, if you look at this, a key source of ritual power appears to have come from this specific type of images called tongwa dongden, or I translate as beneficial to behold. So it literally means a picture whose mere sight brings about benefit. This painting, which is the one from the Potala Palace, appears very closely linked to a print from a woodblock template that was carved in Beijing in the 18th century, which you see on the right-hand side. So just very quickly, you can see the pictorial elements. We have the lotus stand, flanked by 2 serpent kings, 2 nagas, the undulating waves, the jagged outcroppings of the landscape, as well as the design of the garland of figures surrounding the central figure, are all fairly unique compositional elements found on both images. A Tibetan inscription at the bottom of the print on the right identifies this print as a Tongwa Dongden print, as a beneficial to behold print. And it also enumerates at length how one can be cleansed of various sins and wrongdoings of 10,000 eons in the moment that one catches a glimpse of the image. This benefit-bringing image can be traced to a Sanskrit Buddhist ritual manual from Pala, India, called Manjushri-Cakravartin, or translated as the primary ritual ordinance of Manjushri, and to earlier compositions based on the ritual and iconographic prescriptions of the manual. The ritual ordinances prescribe various ritual solutions to the problem of accessing the Buddha's power in a world where the Buddha, by virtue of his liberation from the world, is thought to be not immediately accessible. Chief among the ritual solutions is how to go about making painted images of the Buddha that can serve this purpose. The text translation into Chinese in the 10th century and into Tibetan in the 11th century can be traced both to eschatological concerns about the end of times and the decline of Buddhist teachings. Because of its power to purify all sins from the viewer upon seeing the image, a beneficial to behold picture belongs to the highest level of images. While their assembly of figures and principal deities differ, the Potala Thangka and the beneficial to behold images share the same compositional template. And so this is something that one imagined that one could read as a viewer would be able to register. Another example is a more immediate work that is seen in the more immediate work of expelling sickness and obtaining longevity in this other thangka with a visibly older face of Qianlong. And this thangka was formerly belonged to or hung in, we don't know, in the Puning Temple at the Imperial Summer Palace of Chengde. So I refer to it as the Puning Thangka later. So I think already we have seen in the thangkas that we've seen, there are elements of Buddhist paradises that are ever present throughout. So in addition to just the very obvious kind of pool, we have the paradisical mountain landscape, the lotus ponds. This thangka that we had looked at earlier for purpose of studying the connection to the refuge field thangka has features this kind of circular rainbow light enclosure that is also a hallmark of a compositional type in Amitabha's paradise paintings from Tibet's Tashi Lungpo Monastery. The designs originated supposedly from there. So there's already, you can see this is a later example of that using that same feature. So I think that's already in most of the thangkas that we see in one way or another. But in this one particular version, in the Puning thangka, the elements become solidified as the central theme. The Puning thangka closely resembles this image of Amitabha's paradise that were made in the Qing imperial workshops. It's very interestingly, this same thangka is also made, created in different mediums of not only painting, but embroidery and tapestry. There's even a three-dimensional multimedia tableau inside the Western shrine of the Chongqing Dian. So you can see that painting is done up in this kind of three-dimensional way. So in both the Puning thangka and the rest of the image of the Amitabha paradise, a wish-granting tree above the central figure, flanked by the heavenly scriptures, goddesses and musicians. Some are riding in clouds and carrying parasols and banners. There's lotus ponds surrounded by the gathering of monks, and a facade of protectors and deities appear below. So everything is fairly closely kind of copied from one to another. This very tight parallel, even down to the use of pigments, something you really have to kind of see in person to understand. This closes the process by which images were created through the copying and adoption at the Qing workshops. So in China, Amitabha, or the Buddha of immeasurable light, has long been conflated with Amitayus, or the Buddha of immeasurable life. Amitabha's Western paradise, known as the land of bliss, or Sukhavati, where beings aspire to be reborn into for eternal bliss, also became associated with the desire for longevity in the current life. The particular composition of Amitabha's paradise, with Gelugpa Buddhist deities nestled in rondos in a wish-fulfilling tree above the central Buddha, has no known pictorial precedent outside the Qing palace. I can't find, if anyone knows, I can't find anything like this outside of this group of images. While its origins and repeated adaptation in different mediums warrants further study, it is possible to see the multimedia recreations providing a welcome Tibetan Buddhist counterpart to many Chinese Buddhist Pure Land imageries and spaces that Qianlong created in association with longevity rituals throughout his reign. We have sadhanas of Amitabha, the extent ones that we have, promise not only a rebirth in the land of bliss, but some also promise, quote, dispel untimely death in this life. So the Qianlong thangka once again engage in a visual play of this transformative practice by then replacing Amitabha with Qianlong, thereby partaking in its promised benefit of longevity. A prayer verse that alludes to the aspiration of longevity and also to all the associated rituals appear on all of the thangkas and the shrine panels in the area below. And this one comes from a shrine panel I'll talk about in a second. But it's basically the same, basically almost the same verse. It reads, Manjushri, sharp-witted sovereign of man, playful, unexcelled, great Dharma king. On the diamond seat, feet firm, may your wish spontaneously meet good fortune. So this verse is basically a textual analog to kind of the pictorial layering and identities and efficacious properties that I've just discussed. Uses the puns and wordplays to establish Qianlong's identities in relation to Mandrugosha, to Tsongkhapa, to his teacher Zhangjia, and both the 7th and 8th Dalai Lamas with the wordplays. That the thangkas and shrine panels begin to appear at around the same time that Zhangjia started conducting longevity rites, which are known as the kind of shabdan, the foot-firming rituals on Qianlong's behalf, further corroborates the image's role as a wish-fulfilling, longevity-inducing object. So The Qianlong thangkas therefore appropriated various devotional images to create a new visual language that positioned the emperor at the ritual and liturgical center of the idealized realms that reinforce his Buddhist kingship. As we have seen, the double portrayal of Zhangjia and Qianlong reoriented the visionary perspective of refuge field paintings, pictorializing not only the envisioned lineage and pantheons of Buddhist teachings, but also shifting and merging of deities and practitioners, teachers and disciples, icons and viewers. The thangkas' visual allusion to benefit granting pictures in Amitabha's paradise, as well as the carefully punned verse inscriptions, endow the thangka with additional authorities and life-giving functions and properties. For Qianlong's knowledgeable Tibetan Buddhist viewers, the image would have spoken a new imperial idiom through the ritual and liturgical language of Tibetan Buddhism. So again, the Qing sort of experiment doesn't quite stop here. They also, as I've mentioned at the beginning, of this lecture, created at least a dozen three-dimensional multimedia shrine panels of varying dimensions and compositions. They were produced at least simultaneous to, if not even earlier, judging from the kind of archival records we can glean, to the thangkas. I think that it's important then to take them into consideration in this discussion as well. So I will conclude. My last section will then be about these shrine panels. And I want to show how they are integral. So the thangkas and shrine panels can be seen as kind of integral halves of the same project of redefining kingship through ritual and efficacy. So get to that in a second. Different from the thangkas in that they were not meant to be portable and therefore giftable. These shrine panels, and I'll give you one example here, you can see, were recessed into the interior walls of Qianlong's private palaces inside the Forbidden City. They contain a great variation in the number of total figures. They include some of them have 95 figures, some of them 107 or 8, 110. And then there's also one enormous diagonal composition of 256 figures that stretches the entire length of this second story or two-story chapel. An especially large number of these shrines are founded in Qianlong's retirement quarters of Ningshou Gong, presumably not meant to be seen by anyone besides the emperor and his most immediate circle. As objects, they push beyond the limits of pictorial representation, both by enshrining and materializing the entire pantheon in a multimedial, multimodal, and multilingual display that exhibits an absorbing interest in harnessing the power of objects, materials, forms, and illusions. Just as multilingualism acted as a marker for Qing universal rulership, the material polyglossia, just heading for the section, of the shrine panels reflect sustained experimentations with recreating and enlivening the perceived power of a collection of Buddhist objects and teachings from near and far to articulate a Qing and specifically Qianlong-centered universal Buddhist kingship. So in the center of the shrine panel, you see here, that is located in the eastern side hall of Yuhuage, the pavilion of raining flowers, is a golden image of, as you can see here, a golden image of an enrobed, enthroned emperor in relief, framed by a painted surface of a nine-niched palace in a lush blue and green landscape underneath the sky of multicolored clouds that is also reminiscent of the palace and mountain paradises of the deities Manjushri, Amitabha. Along with the central figure, gilded and lacquered clay images dwell in 107 remaining round glass-covered niches that are set into an intricately painted surface. and each encircled by this rainbow light. And you think you've seen it before because it's on the thangkas. These painted clay forms, ones in the middle, they're actually called by their Chinese name in the records as chatsas, or qini's, the Chinese word for chatsas, which are the Chinese colloquial term for the Tibetan molded clay figurines. Let's see here. And then the niche coverings are made of clear, transparent glass introduced from Venice at the end of the 17th century, a technology that was much desired and that still could not be produced domestically. This kind of clear glass was something that was really sought after. And so you can see here how similar this effect is to this painting version. It's kind of interesting. It makes you really relook at the paintings in a different way. Their arrangement recalls the array of niche shrines that are also produced. I think something's wrong with this. It came out a little funny, I think, but maybe I'll just skip this. It's a little confusing. Something happened. But the arrangement recalls the array of niche shrines that the court produced to house Buddhist sculptural images that were both produced at a court and that had entered the Qing court in large quantities as gifts from different parts of Tibet, Mongolia, and the Himalayas. Their enshrined appearance evoke that of icons and relics from sacred Buddhist regions at the outer peripheries of the empire. The whole panel is then encased by a red sandalwood frame from India, carved with the 8 auspicious symbols and further flanked by the Sinic idiom of Qianlong's calligraphy couplet. The couplet reads, Buddha radiance illuminates from the crest of the 9 tiers, wisdom pearls call witness to the nature of existence across the triple realms. It unambiguously positions the emperor, showing the golden relief in the center, as the pinnacle of light and wisdom. It also puns on the luminescence of imported glass technique and the gold-painted Tibetan clay images. Through this multimedia assemblage and installation, the refuge field thangkas pictorialized the vision is reified into a 3-dimensional shrine, where the instantiated presence of deities and lineage holders in the form of clay images is firmly enshrined in the majestic palaces, mountain landscapes, and also imperial brush-trace of the Qing Imperium. It is the ultimate physical receptacle and refuge of Buddhist lineages and teachings. Zhang Yajing, a researcher at the Palace Museum, has done some work trying to systematically examine the shrine panels. And very interestingly, she reveals that the assembly in the shrine panels differ from the thangkas in that they seem to emphasize teaching transmission lineages rather than the convening of powerful deities and teachings in the thangkas. So if the shrine panels emphasize the comprehensive mapping as of members of the transmission lineages over time, the thangkas' reiteration of major deities in various manifestations chart their spatial domains, including the territorial domains of Tibet, Mongolia, and China. Especially when examined as a group, the diversity of pantheons and compositions across the various thangkas and shrine panels reinforce again this experimental nature of the attempt to encapsulate the totality of time and space. The Qianlong thangkas and shrine panels that serve as outer and inner halves of an ongoing project to perform for the Tibetan Buddhist constituents of the Qing Emperor and for himself, respectively, an Indo-Tibetan Buddhist kingship recentered on Qianlong and his guru, the chief source of his connection to Gelugpa Buddhism. So in conclusion, by tracing the ways in which this corpus of Qing images borrowed from, combined, and reconfigured a plethora of contemporaneous images and image-making traditions that originates from the Tibetan ritual context, ranging from liturgically prescribed icons, also relics and reliquaries, paintings of Buddhist paradises, you've got teaching, transmission, incarnation lineages, and so on. I have shown how the Qianlong thangkas operated as highly legible yet inventive images within a dynamic image world. That the image also embodied an explicit ideological agenda of imperial supremacy meant that the potentiality of ritual transformation would have been the first and foremost concern for their designers. So according to the teachings of the Gelugpa school that captivated Qianlong school, the Qianlong emperor, this is the Madhyamaka school philosophy. To affirm the ultimate Buddhist idea of emptiness is to affirm that the world and the worldly and the material is in every way inseparable from the spiritual and the immaterial. So if we return then to the Qianlong, the freer thangka, as unexpected as it may be to see the Manchu emperor appear as a lama through the Baroque-inspired realism at the center of a Tibetan Buddhist spiritual pantheon and genealogy, it is also important to remember that the visionary world of teachers generated by the practitioners' imaginative capacities would have been equally unfathomable, buried in subject to individual experience. Qianlong's thangkas and shrine panels acknowledge the fluid nature of visions and the fact that when pictorialized and materialized, their authority can be tailored and reified. It is this awareness of the flexibility of ritual identity and how images function that ultimately allow Qianlong's images to effect and to affirm within the geopolitical reaches of the empire, a new Qing-centered religious universe. Thank you.